The large auditorium was buzzing with excitement as the audience waited for the next act. The stage lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd when a small figure appeared from behind the curtain. A 10-year-old boy, dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers, walked slowly toward the center of the stage. In his tiny hands, he held the microphone tightly, as if it were his only source of courage. His eyes darted nervously around the massive theater, glancing at the judges' table where Simon Cowell sat with his usual composed expression. The boy took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling rapidly, trying to steady himself. The judges smiled politely, waiting for him to speak. Amanda Holden leaned forward with a kind expression, while Alicia Dixon gave him a soft nod of encouragement. The audience whispered quietly, some smiling, others uncertain. It was clear that the boy was nervous, his voice trembled as he introduced himself. "My name is Oliver," he said, almost in a whisper. "I'm 10 years old, and I'm here to sing." A few people in the audience chuckled softly, not out of mockery, but in disbelief that such a young contestant had the courage to perform on such a grand stage. Simon leaned forward, studying the boy carefully, his expression unreadable. The bright stage lights reflected in Simon's eyes as he gave a small nod, signaling the boy to begin. Oliver took another deep breath, closing his eyes for a brief moment, as if gathering every ounce of confidence he had left. The silence in the theater grew heavier. Then, with the faint sound of piano music beginning to play, he lifted the microphone closer to his lips. The tension in the air was electric, everyone waited to hear if this young boy could truly sing. As the soft piano intro faded into the background, the camera cut to the judges' table, capturing their first impressions. Simon Cowell leaned slightly forward, his elbows resting on the desk, eyes fixed on the young contestant. His expression was calm but curious, that familiar mix of skepticism and interest he often showed when he wasn't sure what to expect. Amanda Holden smiled warmly, her eyes full of encouragement, as if silently telling the boy that he could do this. Alicia Dixon gave a reassuring nod, her posture relaxed, wanting to ease his visible nerves. David Walliams, seated at the far end, grinned broadly, already charmed by the child's innocence. The boy, still standing center stage, shifted nervously from one foot to the other, glancing at the judges. The vastness of the stage seemed overwhelming, the bright spotlights blinding yet isolating. The audience murmured quietly, some whispering words of encouragement, others skeptical about whether someone so young could deliver a powerful performance. The tension grew heavier by the second, the silence between the notes almost louder than any sound. Simon finally broke the silence, his tone measured yet kind. "All right, Oliver," he said, his voice carrying through the auditorium. "Take your time. Whenever you're ready." Those words, simple as they were, carried an unexpected comfort. The boy nodded slowly, gripping the microphone tighter, trying to steady his trembling hands. Behind him, the massive BGT logo glowed in soft blue, casting a magical hue over the stage. The orchestra conductor gave a tiny signal, and the gentle chords of the instrumental began to play again. Every pair of eyes, judges, audience, and cameras, were locked on him. In that fragile moment before the first note, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if a miracle was about to unfold. The gentle piano melody filled the theater, wrapping the room in a calm yet tense silence. The boy stood motionless for a heartbeat, his eyes closed, his small fingers trembling around the microphone. Then, as the first verse approached, he took a slow, deep breath and began to sing. The very first note that left his lips was soft but pure, so unexpectedly beautiful that it silenced even the faintest whispers in the crowd. His voice, delicate yet controlled, carried through the massive auditorium like a breeze brushing against still water. Simon's head lifted immediately, a flicker of surprise flashing across his face. His usual composure wavered for a moment as he exchanged a quick glance with Amanda, who smiled, her eyes widening in awe. The change in the atmosphere was instant, what had moments ago been curiosity and doubt transformed into wonder. The audience, once restless, leaned forward collectively, drawn in by the sheer innocence and clarity of the sound. The boy's voice grew steadier with each line. Every note seemed to come from deep within his heart, as though he were not just singing lyrics but telling a story he felt deeply connected to. The spotlight above him shone brighter, casting a gentle halo around his small figure, giving the impression that this moment was meant to happen. By the time he reached the second line, his nerves had almost vanished. He opened his eyes and looked straight ahead, his voice now filled with confidence. The raw emotion in his tone began to stir something in everyone present. Simon's eyes softened, no more skepticism, just silent admiration. For the first time that evening, it wasn't about a competition. It was about witnessing something rare, a young boy revealing the voice of a true artist. As the song moved into its middle section, everything about the boy began to change. The fear that had once held him captive seemed to fade with every note he sang. His shoulders straightened, his stance grew firm, and his voice began to soar with a strength that no one expected from someone his age. The timid child who had stepped onto the stage moments ago was gone, now he sang with passion, confidence, and emotion that filled the entire theater. The melody swelled, and his tone rose effortlessly, each high note echoing with breathtaking clarity. The audience began to react almost instinctively. A few people gasped, others clapped mid-performance, unable to hold back their excitement. Some even stood, caught up in the magic of the moment. The camera swept across the sea of faces, mothers wiping tears, fathers shaking their heads in disbelief, children staring in awe. On stage, the boy's eyes glimmered under the lights, and though his hands still trembled slightly, his voice never faltered. He was no longer just performing, he was living the song. Simon leaned back in his chair, his expression slowly shifting from intrigue to genuine amazement. His eyes followed every movement, every note, as though trying to memorize the exact second this transformation took place. Amanda and Alicia exchanged looks of astonishment, both smiling proudly, knowing they were witnessing something special. The orchestra built the music higher, and the boy matched it perfectly, hitting a powerful high note that hung in the air like magic. The energy inside the theater was electric, every person could feel it. It was the moment when everyone realized that this wasn't just a performance by a 10-year-old boy. This was the emergence of a true star, and Simon knew it too, even if he hadn't said a word yet. Simon sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the young boy as the performance continued. For years, he had seen countless auditions, some brilliant, many forgettable, but there was something undeniably different about this one. The boy's voice wasn't just good, it was pure, emotional, and filled with something real. As the chorus rose, Simon's usual poker face softened. He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand, studying every nuance of the boy's performance. There it was, the unmistakable spark he had spent his career searching for. A faint smile began to form on Simon's lips, the kind that appeared only when he was truly moved. He glanced sideways at Amanda, who was already teary-eyed, and then at Alicia, who mouthed, "Wow." Simon didn't respond, he simply nodded, his eyes never leaving the stage. In that silent exchange, the judges understood, this wasn't just another good audition. This was a moment. As the boy transitioned into the bridge, his voice grew stronger, carrying a depth that defied his age. The lights above dimmed slightly, creating a halo around him. It was cinematic, one of those rare, perfect moments where everything aligned, the voice, the song, the emotion, and the story. The camera zoomed in on Simon's face just as he exhaled quietly, his expression soft but serious. He whispered under his breath, "He's special." The audience, completely spellbound, didn't even clap between verses anymore. They were captivated, hanging on every word. Simon's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the realization that he was witnessing something extraordinary. The corners of his mouth lifted into a proud, knowing smile. This was it, the moment Simon Cowell knew he had just found a superstar, and nothing on that stage would ever be the same again. The music swelled toward its final, emotional climax. The young boy stood center stage, his voice now filled with a raw power that resonated through every corner of the auditorium. His small frame seemed to hold a giant spirit. As he approached the final chorus, his expression grew intense, eyes closed, brows furrowed, and his heart clearly pouring out through every word he sang. The orchestra behind him lifted the melody higher, matching his passion note for note, until it felt as if the entire room was trembling with emotion. Then came the final note, a soaring, breathtaking high note that seemed to suspend time itself. The boy held it longer than anyone expected, his voice unwavering and pure. The audience collectively gasped, and for that brief moment, no one even breathed. When he finally released the note, letting the last vibration fade into silence, there was a beat of complete stillness, then an explosion of sound. The entire theater erupted in cheers, whistles, and thunderous applause. People leapt to their feet, clapping wildly, shouting his name. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. On stage, the boy opened his eyes slowly, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He looked around, dazed, almost not believing what he was hearing. His small hands trembled as he lowered the microphone, and when he saw the judges' standing ovation, his lips curved into a shaky smile. Tears welled in his eyes, glistening under the spotlight. Amanda was visibly moved, clapping with both hands pressed to her heart. Alicia was smiling through tears. David gave a proud, joyful cheer. And Simon, who had remained still for most of the performance, was now standing, clapping slowly, his expression soft yet powerful. In that instant, everyone knew that this was not just talent, it was magic, pure and unforgettable. As the applause finally began to settle, the young boy stood frozen in the center of the stage, still trying to take in what had just happened. His eyes were wide with disbelief, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to catch his breath. The golden lights shimmered across the theater, reflecting off the tears that now streamed down his cheeks. The audience continued to cheer his name, their excitement echoing like a wave through the room. Slowly, Simon raised a hand, signaling for quiet. The noise began to fade until only the soft sound of the boy's breathing could be heard. Simon took a deep breath and leaned forward, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "You know," he began, his words cutting through the silence, "I've been doing this show for a very long time." The boy looked at him, eyes glistening. "And every once in a while," Simon continued, "someone walks out on this stage, and from the very first note, you just know." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the room. "You have something truly special, something people are going to remember for the rest of their lives." The boy covered his mouth, his tiny frame shaking as tears rolled freely down his face. Amanda smiled warmly, wiping away her own tears, while Alicia nodded in agreement, clearly moved. David clapped again, his grin wide and full of pride. Simon's expression softened even more. "You didn't just sing tonight," he said. "You touched every single person in this room." The audience erupted once again in applause, their cheers louder than before. The boy smiled shyly through his tears, whispering a small "thank you." For Simon, it was clear, he wasn't just looking at a contestant. He was looking at the future. The theater was still echoing with applause when Simon leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful yet filled with pride. The young boy stood on stage, overwhelmed, tears glistening on his cheeks as he looked toward the judges. He could barely believe what was happening, thousands of people cheering just for him. His hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone close to his chest, his heart pounding in disbelief. Then, without saying a word, Simon slowly reached forward. His fingers hovered above the golden buzzer. The audience gasped, realizing what might be coming. The boy's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. For a split second, the entire room seemed to freeze. Simon looked at him, his eyes filled with genuine emotion, and smiled, a rare, proud, almost fatherly smile. Then, with one firm push, his hand came down on the golden buzzer. The sound was instant, an explosion of music and cheers as golden confetti burst from above, showering the stage in shimmering light. The audience roared, some jumping to their feet, waving their arms in celebration. The boy's knees buckled as he dropped to the floor, covering his face, crying uncontrollably. He had just lived every performer's greatest dream. Amanda and Alicia stood, clapping and cheering, while David threw his arms in the air, laughing joyfully. Simon remained seated for a moment, smiling softly, watching the boy being lifted by the emotion of the moment. The stage was now a sea of gold, the confetti swirling around him like magic. From backstage, the boy's family rushed out, his mother and father hugging him tightly as the crowd continued to chant his name. Simon looked on, nodding slightly, satisfaction written all over his face. He didn't need to say it aloud. Everyone knew. This was the moment he found his superstar.